Good morning, everybody. I'm Carol Young, Director of Reward Pension and Benefits at RBS and incoming Chair of the PLSA's DC Policy Council. And it's my great pleasure today to chair this esteemed panel as we take you through the PLSA's latest release, Hitting the Target, Delivering Better Retirement Outcomes. So just a quick sense of what you can expect over the next 45 minutes. I'm going to hand over to Richard in a moment, who's going to give you a flavour of the overall thrust of the consultation document, and then each of the guys here are going to bring to life some of the key points before we open it up to you for some questions. As always, if you open up the app, you're also able to put questions to the panel through that, and I'll keep an eye out, and then our roving mics will go around. So just to give you a sense of who you're going to be hearing from, we've got here Richard Butcher, probably doesn't need an introduction, but I'll give him one anyway. Managing Director since 2010 of PTL, incoming Chair of the PLSA. He's been involved in pension scheme governance, man and boy Richard, since 1985. Then we've got Martin Fahy from the Association of Superannuation Funds in Australia, Chief Executive Officer there, and Martin will bring to life for us some of the experiences in Australia where some of the ideas that we're bringing out here are a little more advanced. And in addition to distinguished corporate career, Martin also has policy experience from his time as an academic, and he's a Fulbright scholar, amongst other things. We have Patrick Heath-Lay from the People's Pension, who took over as Chief Executive Officer in 2012. He joined the organisation in 1985. Again, it's a good vintage for pensions, clearly, and has been driving that business forward. And last but not least, we've got Tim Sharp from the TUC, Policy Officer, promoting the TUC's policy agenda and supporting its network of pension trustees. So there's lots to talk about. I suspect time is going to be more limited than opinions, so I'm not going to hang about. I'm just going to ask Richard to take us through. Richard chaired the steering group, which began known as the 10-year vision, which I was part of, and developed over a number of months and many, sometimes heated conversations into the consultation document, Hitting the Target. So over to you, Richard.
Thanks, Carol. Morning, everybody. Did you all turn up for the 5K run? Yeah, I didn't. I'm already getting stick for it, but now I was going to rely, while I was speaking, on the prop of my copy of the consultation document, but Carol's already stolen it. So there is a copy over there, if anybody's really interested. No, of course you're all really interested. So over the last few years, there's been some significant changes to the architecture of pension provision in the UK. We've seen the introduction and successful rollout of auto-enrolment, and we've seen the re-engineering of the state pensions so that we now have the single flat-rate state pension. So in my opinion, we're in a much better place than we were 6 or 7 years ago, but the system isn't yet optimised. The system doesn't work as well as it could do. There is still more work to do. You could say that the system isn't yet tickety-boo. Yep, it is easy, isn't it? So the PLSA created a working group, and we were given a project to come up with a 10-year vision of what could happen to pensions and lifetime savings to build on the success of auto-enrolment and of the single rate flat rate pension. And we gave it this project of a 10-year vision. What could we do? What proposals could we come up with that over a period of 10 years would take the system forward to further improve it? And our mission was simple. What we wanted to do was to provide proposals that would ensure or help to ensure people getting a better retirement income. And what I'd like to do is just walk you through briefly our proposals. So despite the success of auto-enrolment, research carried out by the association last year found that 50% of people won't be able to sustain their level of income or level of standard of living beyond retirement. And that, quite simply, is because they're not saving enough money. Our main proposal in the policy document, which at this point I'd hold up and wave, is for the development of a series of national retirement income targets, because it's clear that targets or rules of thumbs do change people's behaviour. They can work. And a really good example of that is the 5 a day campaign that's been running for a number of years. It's high profile, it's created a new social norm, and there is evidence that people eat more fruit and veg as a result of the 5 a day campaign. So we believe that a set of clear, comprehensible and tangible income targets could help people to conceptualise the amount of money they need to set aside in order to have an adequate income in retirement. Now, of course, there is already an existing target, that used by the Pension Commission, the target replacement rate. But it's not widely used, and we think that that's because it's hard for savers to understand. It's a graduated target, and it's clearly failed to engage as an engagement tool. So, according to polling that we carried out earlier on this year amongst savers, 77% of people don't know how much money they'll need for retirement. And when we floated with them the idea of giving them a target, 80% of them thought it would be a good idea and that they should be developed. We envisage that the suggested national retirement income target should give an indication of the amount of money needed in order to have different standards of living. So we've proposed 3: a minimum target, a modest target, and a comfortable target. So that's 3 targets. And that these, once we're in dialogue with the member, can be finessed to allow for a number of factors, including that the spending pattern changes over the course of an individual's retirement, to allow for regional variations, and to allow for household composition. So it's just the start of a conversation. It's the way of beginning a conversation. Now, in the consultation document, we set out what we think these retirement targets could look like. The levels that we've identified are based on research with savers, that same polling exercise, and also grounded in some other research, for example, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation's minimum income standard. And on that basis, we think that the minimum target should be of the region of £10,000 a year for a single person, between £15,000 and £20,000 a year for the modest target, and for between £20,000 to £30,000 a year for the comfortable target. But we also concluded in our debates that those targets should be grounded in fact. They should be based on a specific basket of goods. They should be anchored in real life. This is the approach that's been adopted in Australia, as I understand it, where income standards have been in place since 2004 and are now incorporated into benefit statements and modelers online. But perhaps Martin can tell us more about the Australian experience in a little while. Do ask him about the alcohol measure, by the way. We've set out proposals, so that's our main proposal, but we've also set out proposals in a number of other areas. On auto-enrolment, we think that the scope should be broadened. More people should be included in auto-enrolment. The young, those aged between 18 and 21, those with multiple sources of income where they aggregate to greater than £10,000 a year, and the self-employed. We also think that the scope of auto-enrolment should be deepened. The level of contribution needs to increase to, we think, 12% as a minimum. And we set out in the consultation some proposals around how that increase could be phased in, and also, and this was the source of some controversy amongst us, the split in that contribution between employee and employer. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that. On tax reliefs, we think tax reliefs should be restructured, should be modified to support those targets. But we haven't yet set out any detailed proposals, so we'd like to hear your ideas on that. On property, our consultation calls on providers to look at how equity release products could be developed to support the variety of income needs that retirees experience over the course of their later life, and for schemes to spend more time communicating with their members on how they can use property wealth to provide a retirement income. And we also call on pension schemes to invest more in housing. We set out proposals on working longer, and hence my question yesterday to Linda Grattan. We set out measures to encourage more midlife retirement income planning and call for a group of providers and employers to come together and work up a set of principles that will make it easier for people to work for longer. We can call for improvements on governance of pension schemes, and in particular on the pensions regulator to focus on the quality of trustees, the inputs of governance as opposed to the outputs of governance. We call for IGCs to be given more power during the decumulation stage, and we call for the pensions industry, us, to develop common metrics for measuring value for money. We propose the adoption of a new regulatory framework for decumulation, which, while encouraging members to take active decisions about what their future will hold, could also involve trustees and or IGCs signposting people towards a good outcome, the sort of standard outcome that an average person could go for. And also signposting them towards suitable products, those products complying with government mandated quality principles. And then we also call for a change in legislation to give trustees and IGCs doing that signposting a safe haven. And then we also call for greater engagement and improved engagement. We didn't pretend we had all the answers on engagement. I think one of the problems that we have is that we do assume we do know all about engagement. We recognise that we don't. We should gather as much evidence as possible as we can to improve engagement, particularly at the point of retirement. We call for the industry to embrace fintech, and in particular the pensions dashboard, and call on providers and schemes to use more standardised language and to make most of teachable moments and rules of thumbs, all of which were proposals called out yesterday by Rustin, Greg and Steve. I've been forgetting to press that all the way through, but somebody's done it for me, isn't it marvellous? So the consultation closes on the 12th of January, and we'd love to hear what you've got to say. Our ideas will be improved if we can collectivise our intelligence and collectivise your imagination. So please feed into the consultation. We'll be hosting a series of roundtable events over the autumn around the country when we'll be talking about this. If you can get along to one of those, then please do. And we'll also be holding a series of member events in London and Edinburgh over the autumn. So again, if you can get along to one of those, then please do. Carol, I just wanted to finish on one last thing, which is really to say thank you to the team. We had a really good steering group. We had some really robust debates. We didn't agree on everything, which is why we put this out as a consultation. That's the mark of a good debate, I think. So thank you to the steering group, and thank you to the executive as well, who put in a huge amount of work to produce a consultation which contains proposals which, well, quite frankly, I'm proud to put my name to. So thank you, team.
Thank you, Richard. It was teamwork throughout, right up to the point where I clicked your slides for you. We're a well-oiled team.
It was you.
Yeah. So, Martin, if I could just turn to you first, as Richard pointed out, one of the key conclusions of the consultation document is that we need to help people answer the question, how much is enough? And we propose that part of the solution for that might be some form of national retirement income targets. And I know that you've already got those in Australia. I know Richard wants to know about the alcohol measure. So could you just bring to life for us a bit how they're used in Australia, whether they do promote effective retirement income planning, and are there any lessons or cautionary tales we should take if we try to go down the same route?
Thank you very much, and it's really lovely to be here. The ASFA retirement standard is, as it suggests on the box, an ASFA retirement standard. So it's not endorsed by the regulators. Governments use it and abuse it, depending on the sort of political pragmatism. Pension funds incorporate, superannuation funds incorporated into their annual statements. I was horrified to discover we didn't have a licensing arrangement. You can just go online and take it. As you said, it's there for quite a while. We update it every quarter. And some aspects that are designed to engage you. It asks you about, what type of haircut would you like in retirement? Do you want your friends and neighbours cutting your hair? How often do you want it cut? And how how much you'd like to pay. It also asks that question about your alcohol consumption, etc. All of this, while it appears frivolous, is designed to, I think, address an important sort of philosophical issue, which is what category are we in? And by category, I mean, what business are we in this room? And the temptation in Australia is to say you're in the superannuation business. Well, the superannuation business is a kind of a regulatory, legal tax construct within financial services. ASFA, we believe, we're in the retirement funding business. And retirement funding means that we're in the business of funding the services that you will need in retirement, whenever that is and however that manifests itself. And the purpose of the standards is to give a very granular, detailed breakup, not unlike what you're proposing, of what a very minimal standard, which is the age pension in Australia, which is actually quite generous by international standards, what a modest standard would look like, and what comfortable or dignified might look like. And we've built that up over time. We've made changes to it. So at one stage, the momentous decision as to when we'd swap out, renting videos and replace it with, CDs, when we, swap out and put in Netflix, all of those things. So the standard's been quite robust, and it's been validated. It's quite widely used, as I said. What's really interesting was we made a number of errors. It presupposed, right up until I joined, that you retired owning a mortgage-free house. It's a bit of an oversight. 14 years and 13, 14 years and missed that. 1 in 8 people in Australia retire with a mortgage, 1 in 8 retire into rental accommodation. If you don't have a house over your head, it almost doubles the amount that you require. It adds about $20,000 to your requirement at the comfortable level, and it almost doubles the lump sum level that you require. All of this is, I suppose, a long-winded way of saying that the presence of a target, a retirement standard, means that we can have a national conversation, however robust it is, about what retirement will feel like for people. People want to experience retirement as an emotional construct, not as a rational construct. It's an emotional engagement. And if nothing else, that's what the retirement standard tries to do. It brings it down to the mundane of how much are you going to spend on groceries, how often are you going to change the car. One of the things we've pointed out that really resonates, when I go on national radio and campaign for increasing the SG contribution, I point out that large numbers of people on the age pension in Australia during the summer can't afford to turn on the air conditioning. That gets a lot of cut through, as you can imagine, when it's 42 degrees in Melbourne. And we're able to have this very granular, detailed conversation. So I'd encourage you to embrace the idea of a target. I'd encourage you to, think of the category as retirement funding, and wish you best endeavours. The second mistake we made by not when we didn't include housing, the second mistake we made was by calling the third retirement standard comfortable. Certain elements within the public policy debate found that offensive. There was an assumption that comfortable was an aspiration that was beyond the system, and that we shouldn't, the idea of comfortable, given the fiscal challenges that we faced, was beyond public policy. We found that really, really amazing. We continue to have this critics of it. It's not without its critics. I'd ask you to engage with it, but I think it has been really, really useful in galvanising the conversation and engaging people.
Thank you. I'm just keeping an eye on the questions that are coming through, and Richard, just to build on that, one of the questions we've had through is that as part of this, how do we make sure that we're not too negative and that we don't risk undoing the good work? So I guess the first thing we'd want to make really clear is that the opening of the consultation document absolutely recognises as a cause for celebration. The people have more choice than ever, that more people than ever are saving, and it's really much more about how we build on that. But we do know from the other things we saw from the conference challenge and other things that some people are anxious. And so I'd just be interested maybe to hear from both of you on when we begin that conversation, when we seek to begin that national conversation, how do we use the targets to hit the balance where people are informed but not terrified?
Oh gosh, that's a tricky question. Why didn't you ever go with that one, Martin?
There's nothing that scares people more than a big lump sum number.
Yeah.
Saying to somebody in Australia, you need $640,000, that's more than they probably paid for their house. It's massive multiples of their income. It's just a huge, threatening target that seems beyond reach. I think a retirement income target is something people can understand. And from that point of view, we've been able to, to create an inflection point away from discussing the lump sum. Everybody wants to talk about the lump sum. The problem with the lump sum is that it is a very disengaging number. And so once you start talking about, and talk about the age pension and have that conversation, it does make people more optimistic.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I'm a strong believer in we should be honest with the saver. So we do have to tell them the size of the mountain they have to climb. because otherwise they're going to get disappointed. They'll get disappointed at some point if they don't engage with it. I would rather they were disappointed at 35 than at 65. But I think there are ways of presenting it, and the beauty of what we do is that we're long-term investors. So if we can get money into the system relatively early, then compounding will do a lot of the heavy lifting. So we should encourage people to engage quite early and to start saving as early as they can. But also I agree, it is to a certain extent a question of perspectives and presentation. If we tell people they've got to build up £600,000, they're going to be terrified. If you can say to them, well, you're earning £30,000 and you want a pension of £20,000, well, that's much more manageable.
And that's
we can
certainly
break it down into bite-sized chunks.
That's what the survey showed as well, wasn't it? That people have actually got a thirst for something that helps them judge how much is enough. So national retirement income targets are the sort of cornerstone of the set of proposals that are in the consultation document, but as Richard showed you, there were a number of other areas too that we saw as sort of key enablers for delivering what began as our 10-year vision. There's a number of them, and so we might not get a chance to cover all of them. But Tim, you'll have seen that one of them was around automatic enrolment. And I just wondered if you wanted to chat a bit about your view, and in particular, the proposals include an idea that automatic enrolment contributions for the default need to move from 8% of band earnings up to 12% of salary. We know that's going to be a longer term aspiration, but some thoughts on that, please?
Well, when I talked to sort of member unions of the TUC, particularly those who've got lower paid workers in the private sector, things like retail, they feedback the members are very pleased they're now being enrolled into pensions, a lot of them, and but the impression is that they're now set. That's them, they've got a pension, they're going to be fine when they retire. And so we're very concerned about this sort of looming problem of people getting to retirement and not being able to continue anything like the lifestyle that they used to have. And I do think that the income targets are a potentially very useful tool in the sort of discussion in this area. They're about lifestyle, they're talking about they're talking about the lifestyle you might enjoy, they're talking about the sort of goods that you might purchase, and I can see that's potentially that is potentially useful for I guess for some individuals, for engaged savers, both of them, to think about how they're going to what they're going to do with their contributions. It could be useful for engaged employers, for unions thinking about the sort of contributions they're arguing for, and I think most personally I think it could be a very useful tool for the rest of us to judge government policy, is the prevailing rates of state pension and workplace pensions, what they are they actually going to deliver people in retirement? And I think it's very clear that certainly 1% plus 1% as a minimum rate isn't going to do much, and 8% of bad earnings almost certainly isn't going to be sufficient either. So I think it's going to be useful contribution to that debate. I would like to see. I think maybe the consultation document perhaps pulled its punches a little on employer contributions. I think what you stated was, I think employers should continue at least contributing 37.5 and maybe go up to 50%. I think there was recent PPI research showing that at least having matching contributions has a notable impact on retaining people within pension schemes, and certainly we think that if you're wanting to raise rates to the sort of things you're talking about, it might be 12%, it might be 15, 16%, then I think especially if you want to control the impact on people's behaviour, then the employer contribution has to make up a significant part of that, possibly 2/3. So, yeah, I think it's clearly is a longer, but this has to be clearly, we understand this has to be done as a longer term thing. We have to have a plan of where we want to get to, which I think the retirement income targets, once we've sort of kicked the tires a bit, could help us to get to.
Thank you. We're generating lots of questions through the app already, so just to build on that a little bit, in terms of auto-enrolment and getting us to these higher levels of contribution, a couple of questions have come through about the place for auto-escalation within that. Has anybody got any thoughts or experience?
It's a good idea. I think, I'm a big fan of auto-escalation. We should also prompt people at key points in their life. So, we know a lot about our members. We know what the dates of birth are, when their birthdays are. We know that most people get pay rises in January or April. These are all good times to engage with people and send them a positive message about saving more. So I think, yeah, auto-escalation is a great tool. It's consistent with auto-enrolment itself, so we should use that. But I don't think it on its own is going to be enough to get the contribution up to the level that we need.
I think the presumption, and this is, you know, slightly controversial, the assumption that retirement funding exists in a world of occupational pensions, I don't think that relationship is, you know, guaranteed. I think what you've heard yesterday around the changing nature of work, I think the way effort in the economy is organised, I don't think the idea of, you know, relying on the system and the current structures to kick people through, you know, you're changing role every 18 months, you're changing employer every 4 years, in Australia we've got 275,000 people have a second job. That's something you're going to see here. And however much we might object to these structural changes, you know, I think auto-escalation will help. But picking up the pennies and the pence from people's transactions, so the sort of acorns type initiative where people can make extra contributions at a point of time where you prompt somebody and say, it's £1.75, do you want to put the 25 cents change on that transaction into your pension? Mm-hmm. I think the idea that people will be prompted on a continuous basis, I think that fundamental tie to the employment relationship is one that could come up short as we change the nature of the workforce.
I struggle with that a bit, and I think, you know, initiatives like auto-escalation, fine, whatever little top-ups you can do, but they seem to me there's surely going to be things that operate at the margin. If you know, we know what happens when we rely on people to kind of save for themselves. We kind of tried it for you know, increasingly tried it for 20 odd years in pensions policy, and lo and behold, pension saving fell off a cliff. And we've tried it a bit with auto enrolment. We'll go, we'll give you, we'll auto enroll you at a certain level, and then we'll rely on voluntary saving on top. Lo and behold, the same barriers that existed before, inertia, complexity, other calls in your income, are major barriers to people's savings. So I think we've got to accept the occupational pension, you know, with all the governance safeguards and everything else, is going to have to be the core of people's provision for their old age.
Thank you.
Just to respond to that, I think the idea of people, the presumption that the job is the dominant manner in which effort in the economy is going to be organised for the next 40 years is something you have to question. It's not a guarantee. Large numbers of people will choose, I think, to position themselves outside that structure. And I think if we design something that only operates within that, we could have a situation in the US, we've got 30% of people sitting out in the so-called gig economy. If you get to a 30% level of people who sit outside occupational pensions, and you have, you know, people opting out in the low double digits, the core of what's left in there starts to lose critical mass.
There's going to be no shortage of consultation input, I can see. And the engagement section does talk about some of these ideas around teachable moments and how we can maybe engage with people at various points through their life. Because it was a longer term piece of work, whilst we were accepting some of today's challenges, we were also trying to make sure that we kept our eye on where we wanted to be and the things that we want to put in place now to get us to where we would want to be in the coming decades. And so accepting that there are challenges in getting the money in, it is also important not just to get more in, but to get more out and to get more value and trust for savers. And so Patrick, I was hoping that you could bring to life for us a little bit some of the key elements around value for money and how you see it being measured effectively.
Yeah, and I suppose I'll start perhaps linking from the other piece as well, and in general terms, and welcoming the report and actually for continuing the debate, because I think in today's political climate, with policymakers clearly heads in other spaces, with Brexit and other issues, and a fear, I think, from automatic enrolment and what it's managed to do so far, that next rate increase, everyone is watching that to see what happens in terms of opt-out. I think it will be easy to lose this off the agenda. Mm. And I think actually I'd applaud the work of that group in terms of bringing forward that, because I think it is something that I think we need to have some more honest conversations on about in the UK. I don't think, and honesty and politics I know perhaps don't go together, but it is a critical question about people that have gone into automatic enrolment at the moment are assuming that either A, they are aware of what's gone on and that what they're saving is sufficient, when clearly it isn't. Or perhaps don't even realise at the current rates what's actually happening. So I think there's a degree of honesty that needs to be happening around that debate to make sure that this is something that people do start to at least become aware of, let alone engagement, because I think that's a much tougher ask. In terms of the question about key elements of value for money, I mean, value for money has been talked about quite a lot within this industry. Two big elements clearly are cost and return. How much is it going to cost to provide savers with a good return for that investment? There are other, perhaps softer issues around quality, on governance, or on the viability of schemes, which I think need to be measured in there as well. And we've already moved the debate at the moment into transparency, certainly now starting to look through the investment industry, which I think is welcome again, in terms of bringing visibility. But I don't think we've got some of the basics right. Some of the basics in terms of, if you bring visibility to the cost within the system, you also need to make it comparable in order to genuinely drive value. And at the moment, let alone worrying about the investment industry, even the way that charges are leveraged on pension schemes themselves are not comparable. They're not in a standard format. They're not even done in a set prescribed way. And I do think we're going to have to go back to that agenda at some point, because simply disclosing the information does not make it understandable. So again, with the investment side, welcome that move. I think that particularly bringing visibility to the investment management industry is actually very helpful for providers, because I think we've been quite lax as an industry in accepting that investment management does certain things for returns without actually looking under the bonnet too much. But if we can bring visibility to that, we can then have sensible debates about how you put together good journeys for people that are cost effective and returning good value as well. So obviously from the return side of things, I think that might be perhaps an easier nut to crack in terms of how you do that. But again, there needs to be consistency in the way that returns are viewed as well. And I think we have to go back to those basic elements and make sure that they are aligned in the right way to allow us to become truly comparable across the industry.
Thank you. And when we were debating both governance and value for money, one of the things that kept coming up was around the decumulation phase in particular. And I know the jargon klaxon should go off at that point, but we stuck with the word, because at least for the most part, the people who will respond to the consultation would know what it would mean. But is there anything in particular, Patrick, first, that you could add on decumulation? And I'd be interested, Martin, to hear from you to the extent that it's been in place for longer in the Australian market, but if you could kick us off.
Yeah, I mean, the recognition that retirement's changing, everything you heard yesterday from the sessions about, just life changing, and then, us as an industry trying to keep up with that, I think is very, very true. I think we've got to remember that some of the population coming in through the automatic enrolment journey now are new to saving. Pots are very small, so there is always going to be, going back to the value for money point, there's always going to be a trade-off between the complexity you build for a journey and assisting someone through that, and then the cost benefit, bearing in mind that the actual execution at the end is likely to be, I'll just take the whole pot. But I think you're already seeing the debate move to default pathways. Again, just as I'm sort of advocating, government have got to play a role as being mum and dad in this. Let us take our medicine. We have to save for retirement. I think increasingly trustees and schemes will have to move into that space as well, and make the assumption that people aren't going to engage. I think there's lots of things, I'll come on to perhaps engagement in a second, but lots of things in engagement that can be improved. But this is a difficult thing for people to understand, and therefore, we do have to make some decisions for people and indicate, strongly move them towards certain journeys to assist in that. So we've already seen the debate move to that, and I think quite rightly so. So I think you should see increased product coming out in that way and schemes adopting that. The one thing I will say is that the customer journey for people going into retirement at the moment is pretty awful. We're in a sense with automatic enrolment, people are going into without making that positive direction choice, but they're being asked to make an incredibly big decision at the end. They are unable currently, as with SuperStream, I think in Australia, to take their pot with them. So they have no sense of ownership of the issue until the very point that you actually say, now make a decision. And our experience through our own research is that people don't even understand when they're taking their money that it's theirs. and it's not mine, so I'll just take the whole lot out, and the bit I don't need, I'll put it in the bank, because that way it's mine. And that's just a very, very strange thing at the moment to see. So I think we have to give people better chance of taking ownership of the issue. And I think that's where advocating dashboard, the work that I know Rustin's doing on the 17 review, but actually utilising dashboard not only to answer the question of what have I got and where is it, but more than that, actually looking at, I think, the technology behind that could actually reform the system, allow pots to go with people on their journeys. So it's an incredibly important initiative, and I think if I'm right, from what I've read in the Times this morning, that initiative looks like that is now moving to the DWP from Treasury, which is something that's appeared in the paper this morning, which I think is incredibly welcome. That project has been very successful. I think it's demonstrated how the industry can get behind doing something in a positive way to reform. But again, it's lacked a bit of initiative as we've got to that first phase to take it on the next level. So I'm very hopeful that that report is right this morning and that the DWP will take this thing forward.
Thanks. And Martin, I mean, one of the things that's come through that people have really picked up on is this idea that you yourselves as help and develop services for retirement and for pensioners. So is there anything you can add to that?
I might just say, in terms of public policy settings, the post-retirement environment in Australia is quite a big vacuum. So at the moment, people take the lump sum. They can obviously consolidate up as they go through and get their superannuation in one place, but there's no compulsory annuitisation. And the patterns that we see are people with relatively small balances pay off debt and move on to the age pension. So there's an income and asset test for access to the age pension, and the age pension in Australia provides, if you like, the protection on the longevity risk. We're doing quite a lot of work with Dan Ariely around the trade-offs in retirement between the need for capital, the need for income, and the bequest, and managing those trade-offs. What we see in Australia is people underconsume. They end up asset-rich, income-poor, with a bequest that's out of line with the expectations of their children, and very often end up with situations where cognitive impairment sets in at the very moment when monetising the family home, aged care and healthcare decisions all come together. And so it is not looking good in that post-retirement phase. I think the key thing from our point of view that's causing the biggest problem is the association of retirement with recreation. So we conceive of retirement as being about recreation, and that is not sustainable. And it's not sustainable for two reasons. One, it's really bad for your health, it's bad for your finances. But it's the idea that somehow you deserve this sort of period of extended recreation for 30 years and it's financially sustainable. That has to be challenged. And it has to be challenged because prior to now, the capital you consumed in that recreation-focused retirement was public capital that came to you free. You could walk in the Lake District, you could go to the beach, you could do all of those things. Most of the capital that you will want to consume in your retirement is private capital, and it costs money. So we would caution people. The Australian system, we're not great in post-retirement. We're even more attached to the family home, and monetising the family home is just a conversation that you can't have. What we would say, though, is those settings are something that we have to address, and I think that's where the big vacuum is at the moment.
Thank you. Tim, we've already started to touch on it, and we've seen a few questions come through as well, prompted by yesterday's 100-year life discussion. So for a number of different reasons, we might see that people either want or need to work longer. How can we support realistic extensions to working lives? And what can we do to support people who want to stay and work longer, either for their health or because of financial necessity?
One of the things that I find quite uncomfortable in this debate is often we kind of look at longer working lives as some kind of sticking plaster because we've kind of messed up pensions for the last few decades, and longer working lives are one of the few tools we think we've got left. And I think this is one of the things that worries me about this is I'm not convinced it actually even works. That those with the probably the lowest pension savings are probably those least likely to continue working. They're often, we've done our own analysis. Something like 1 in 3 manual workers out of work in the run up to state pension age are out of work because of illness and disability. But that's not to say there's not very good reasons for working on helping people who want to work longer to work longer. I mean, things like keeping a stable dependency ratio, keeping people's skill, retaining access to people's skills and people's experience are all really important. I think we have to be quite hard-headed about how we achieve this. I'm not convinced that voluntary guidelines are necessarily the way we're going to achieve what requires quite significant change. I mean, we've come up with a few ideas. I think we've got to explore a bit more about flexible working. At the moment, you've got the right to request flexible working after 6 months, but it's very easy for employers to turn it down. So, strengthening the ability to people to request to have their request for flexible working accepted. A day one right to flexible working is something else that we are keen on. We're quite keen on exploring something like a right to a midlife career review. I think that's an interesting area, but it's got to bring in things like training requirements and projecting forward on people's likely health and how their role or workplace might have to be adapted to allow them to continue. And we want to ensure that people have those rights to training. Often older workers miss out on training opportunities, sometimes because they turn them down, but often because it's not, employers don't necessarily see them as worth investing in. But I think there's a lot of things that we have to be very clear that this is probably going to be a government-driven agenda, and it's not just going to happen on its own. And there's stuff, I think, as well, there's clearly things that we have to think about, the role of pension schemes in this as well, and ensuring that older schemes have the ability to have the flexibility to allow people to work and draw a bit of a pension at the same time, and that sort of newer DC schemes, they have got those routes to generating up either full or partial replacement income for those approaching older age.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's interesting, 1 in 10 Uber drivers in Australia are over 60. As a sort of a white male, if you're in a white-collar occupation in Australia, surviving beyond 55 in the workplace is a rarity. You get shunted out really hard and really aggressively. When we've looked at this, part of our view is the definition of what constitutes work is part of the challenge. We keep focusing on effort in the economy. We think there'll be a shortage of jobs, there'll be a shortage of what's traditionally been defined as work, but the demand and the requirement for effort in the economy will be huge. An ageing population around aged care, looking after people in the home, all of those things. We will not be short on things to do and put our efforts towards. The challenge will be they will not be organised into neat jobs that pay you or that necessarily you find fulfilling and speak to your aspirations. I think we have to be really, really, there is a tsunami of automation coming out there that will challenge this view that we will be able to pick and choose in a flexible manner how we will make our way into retirement. It is going to be awful. Okay, the reality is the agricultural revolution gave rise to the decline of the aristocracy monarchy and changed and brought forward democracy. The Industrial Revolution in 1848 in that period caused 8 revolutions across Europe. The Chartists in Manchester were causing mayhem here, and it gave rise to 100 years of collectivism and what followed on from that. We are at the similar sort of trench. Things are going to be really, really challenging. The view we have is that large numbers of people are going to be cobbling together things to do. It is going to be tough in retirement. The numbers back this up. It's going to be tough. Aged care inflation is going to run at 11. Healthcare inflation will be out there at 15. It will be a case of reconfiguring your sense of self and trying to stay in there, and it's going to be tough. And I think the traditional ways of managing that are going to be very challenging.
So can I make a comment on that?
Yeah, and then I have to let the audience... I've got most of the questions they've sent in, but if we could start getting the mics round for the first couple of questions while Richard's making his comment.
One of your association's values is that we're optimistic, so it's not going to be awful. The world is full of opportunity. We do need to re-engineer the system. I completely and utterly agree that we need to re-engineer the system, and the world of work, the world of retirement has got to change. Yes, the point you made about you can't put retirement and recreation together it's not sustainable. I completely and utterly agree with. But in the report, we talk about ensuring that people get to the minimum level of the national retirement income target. However, we may do that, and I think that's a key component part. If we can ensure people get to that minimum level, so that they've at least got a basic subsistence level of standard of living, then we can build on that with the portfolio career or the collection of Uber driving jobs and healthcare jobs and whatever else.
Thank you.
So let's be optimistic.
So if anybody from the audience does want to ask a question, put your hand up now. We'll want to keep them snappy, please.
Voltaire said an intelligent man couldn't be optimistic.
I think that was an insult.
So I think we've got one up the back there, number 4.
My name is Esther. I come from the Beers UK. There is a huge inequality in most of Western societies, and all sorts of statistics show that sort of 1 in 5 to 1 in 4 people are completely innumerate, and really all efforts to make them understand all of this probably going to fall short. So the question is, how do we ensure that there is for the 20-25% also something for the future, even though all sorts of engagement are unlikely to work, at the same time that you have the top 0.1%, benefiting or have benefited so much from what's happened. So I see what you are talking about, sort of good for, 70-75% of the population, but what's going to be disruptive is everyone else. I don't know if you want to say something about this, any of you.
The plans for the 25% who we're probably never going to get engaged.
So Australia has by international standards, a very good age pension. It's generous. It's $1,360 for a couple for a fortnight. That puts the fiscal burden on the economy of 2 to 3%, depending on how you measure it. And it's projected under the current system that it will remain at between 2 and 3% right out to 2050. So it's fiscally sustainable. It also has a public healthcare system that's well funded through fiscal kind of responsibility. The Australian system is predicated on half of the people in superannuation being on either self-funded or partially self-funded. It still sees that 50% of people will be relying on the age pension, and it sees that floor as being very, very important.
So some sort of safety.
Yeah, I'd probably say perhaps didn't come across. I have a slightly different view in terms of the engagement process. I think we should, rather than have so many conversations in this industry about engagement, is actually make an assumption that people will not. So what do we do? Change the way we have that conversation. Granted, there are things we can do, as I've alluded to, that will improve it, and you can get more of the basics right. But I think we have to think on the basis that people will not. So what do we do? And I think that's where the real challenge is. And it requires everyone to step up to that, and as I say, government as well.
So I agree with that, and I think that's one of the reasons we talk about ensuring people get to that minimum level of retirement income, provide us a pattern of behaviours that are normal. But actually, I'd sort of bounce the question back to you in terms of engagement beyond that point in time. I think we're thinking about engagement in a traditional way. And I think one of the challenges I'd make is let's think about engagement in non-traditional ways. Your question was predicated around people not being numerate, but people understand colours, so why do we need to use numbers? Let's just use green, amber, red, or whatever. I don't have all the answers on engagement, but I know we can have a sea change in engagement and make it much, much more successful.
So I'm very conscious of time. I'm going to take one more question. Please be very brief, number 3 at the back here, and then I need to release you to your next sessions.
Thank you. My name's Simon O'Regan. I work for Mercer. Great panel. Love the targets. Great to hear the perspective of the other panelists. Have we given up on engagement? We talk a lot about top-down stuff, rules, processes, targets. Sort of pushing stuff at people. But surely the car can't move without petrol. People have to make contributions. How are we going to change that dynamic?
Very quickly on engagement in Australia. So it's a compulsory system. So you've got defaulted, disengaged, engaged choice. Historically, over a 10-year period, defaulted disengaged members of funds have outperformed by 75 to 100 basis points engaged choice people. So the challenge you have is a 22-year-old plumber who's a member of CBUS is getting a 75 to 100 basis points run-up head start on a retail choice member every single year. I think we assume that being engaged is a good thing. I think that the auto-enrolment, but Australia's defaulting in of compulsory superannuation has meant that there's a lot of set and forget. And, you know, it's a real challenge for me as a markets person. I believed in price signals, but this is really challenging. 75 to 100 basis points.
Drops the mic. I'm going to stop us at that point. We deliberately took the decision to set this as a consultation document because what this has shown is that there's a lot of debate to be had. The proposals in the consultation document take us right across the retirement savings across a lifetime. They make some suggestions about long-term sustainable solutions to key challenges, so please do respond. I've already been, as Richard said, showing you the document in its hard copy there, but you can come to the upcoming roundtables, you can pick up the document from the PLSA's website, and you can email hitting the target at plsa.co.uk by 12th of January, please. I know we didn't talk about tax relief, but we'll have had a budget between then and now, so you might want to keep your powder dry until after that. But do be thinking about it and give us your input by 12th of Jan, please. I have just about left you enough time to get to your first stream sessions, so you can choose between DB, DC, Lifetime Savings and New Horizons, but do walk there briskly. Thank you very much to the speakers, and off you head.